Logan, just before we begin, Rochelle, can you confirm we're still in the holding slides? No one can hear me.
Some people have joined, Adam.
Great. Okay. Looking forward. Thanks.
Might start, Adam.
Thank you, Rochelle, and good afternoon, everybody. It is wonderful to be with you at our first Science, Society, and Innovation Seminar Series event for 2024. We are streaming from the WIC Innovation Center. This series is about innovation and how innovation impacts society, and most importantly, how our WIC University community can leverage innovation to take our incredible work out into society. So we invite incredible guests onto our platform to speak about their experiences with innovation. And these guests often help us learn and understand how better to leverage our innovation ecosystem. It's wonderful to be joined by a number of VITSIs this afternoon, looking at our participants, and also some people from outside the WITS community. So welcome, everybody. Today, I'm incredibly excited to welcome Logan Herzog, who we are very fortunate to have. Unfortunately, we had to cancel our November session with Logan due to unforeseen circumstances. So I've been incredibly excited to hear what Logan has to teach us today. Logan is an Innovation Fellow at Notre Dame and Chief Innovation Officer at RISE. And we're going to hear from Logan all about his experience with running growth efforts within startups, both in Silicon Valley and more broadly around the world. Logan focuses on integrating advanced growth strategies into educational settings. And I think the reason this is so opportune for us right now as the WITS Innovation Center is we're about to launch a flagship program called the PGDIP, or Postgraduate Diploma in Innovation and Entrepreneurship. And this is a program which a number of our colleagues have been working extremely hard on for the last 2 years. We're launching it in the coming few weeks with, an incredible team of lecturers and innovators in their own rights. In fact, I think 2 or 3 of them are on this call right now, so I welcome them as well. And as we're launching this new program as a university, we're looking to learn from the incredible experience that you, Logan, have had in your adventures. So without further ado, I'm going to hand over to you. Welcome again, and the floor is yours. Thanks, Logan.
Yeah, thanks, Adam. Thanks, everybody, for the warm welcome. Really excited to be here. I will say, last session had to be canceled because I literally woke up maybe a day or two before and couldn't speak. I was incredibly sick. So I was super sad that we had to postpone. So happy to be here. And hopefully everybody can take something valuable away from this. I'm going to share some slides here. So before we get started, Adam mentioned this a lot. My current job is to figure out how do we bring growth tactics from the real world into the classroom. So my work as Chief Innovation Officer at Rise includes primarily go-to-market and AI tactics that we bring into curriculum, but also into day-to-day operations. Rise is responsible for writing K through 12 and higher ed entrepreneurship curriculum. So we're working with universities all the way down to kids, helping them learn how to start businesses in the region, which is very exciting. That's a relatively new move for me. Before Rise, and I still currently do this. I was an innovation fellow at Notre Dame. So that started out as me building out some of the programs that I will share with you here shortly. And then also writing and teaching a few courses here in the entrepreneurship program. I come from a very non-traditional background, and I don't have I have experience working in multiple countries and have seen things on the ground, but I do want to just clarify, like, I don't know that I have all the answers perfectly for your region. And so my hope is that you can take some of the things that I've been experimenting with and seen success and apply them where it makes sense and adapt them. But please don't take my words as a presumption that I believe this all works perfectly in every single region. Everybody has to adapt this to some degree. I think working in multiple countries tells you, but it's less that you walk away from that knowing a lot of things and more that you just realize how much you don't know. So I just want to make sure that everybody knows that. For the 7 years before this, I was working as an early stage growth expert, and I still do fractional work to stay on top of the game. But I've worked in-house. I've launched multiple agencies that targeted and worked for Y Combinator alum, 500 startups, Techstars. So I've worked very heavily with venture-backed startups from Silicon Valley. I understand that world, understand how hard it can be, and also how big of a chasm, or rather how big of a challenge it can be to integrate a lot of those tactics into the classroom, while also understanding that most professors and lecturers want to. So coming into the Notre Dame environment, and then eventually with Rise, was really interesting because I had very little education background, but a lot of tactical knowledge and a lot of passion for helping students get access to these tactics. I started my first business while I was in college. I did it to feed my family. It was a very practical reason. I didn't actually set out to be in entrepreneurship early on. And my entire day-to-day is focused on how to help students in that same position have better tactical knowledge so they can actually grow and make money. So it's a very rewarding time of my life. And I'm very excited to be in this space. But please, again, take everything that I say with a bit of a grain of salt and understand that this is very much coming from the tactical side, and there's probably a lot of implications that you will have to navigate on the education side as I'm still kind of understanding that landscape. So a lot of what I'll share here are things that everything I'll share here are things that I've done personally, but they'll be in a few different environments. Some of them will have been implemented in K through 12 or in more like community college settings, and then several of these will have been implemented directly within Notre Dame's ecosystem, and I'll call those out. So first off, we all know, I'm not going to focus too much on the challenges. We all know them. I experienced them primarily as a student, and then I'm being reintroduced to the challenges of bringing go-to-market tactics and growth tactics into the classroom. Let's just call them out real quick so we understand kind of what we're dealing with. We already know that it's very difficult to accredit programs. I'm sure I just heard, 2 years to build that entrepreneurship program. That sounds quite fast. That's impressive to me compared to other things that I've seen. It takes a long time to get things in, which means that a lot of the curriculum is fairly old when it comes to growth tactics by the time it hits the student's desk, right? And that is a constant challenge that everybody faces, and we're trying to do our best given the regulations that we are required to work within, and filling in the gaps where possible. So we already know that's an issue. I believe that a lot of professors have in-house expertise, but I'm already experiencing that it is hard to stay on top of the tactical trends while balancing a career in education. I have a lot of respect for professors who are able to balance that, as I am, maybe more of a part-time professor, part-time implementer and operator, and still struggle to do it. So it's a constant challenge to keep a faculty that is able to implement and stay on top of state-of-the-art tactics. It's very possible that your organization is better at it than where I've worked, and I would love to hear if that's the case. But we also know that there's a lot of resistance to change, and it's very difficult to get buy-in at times from administration, because a lot of these tactics are unconventional. In fact, by nature, they're kind of meant to be unconventional. And that can be difficult to help people with no real go-to-market experience and no startup experience to get buy-in. I know that it's different when I work with Notre Dame, where there's people who have a lot of respect for brands like Y Combinator and 500 Startups, these big startup accelerators on the West Coast. But I remember when I worked in Malaysia, very few government officials and administrators cared about those brands, and rightly so. It doesn't really impact them too much on a day-to-day unless they're working directly with startups. So it can be difficult to translate that and help people understand why these tactics are relevant and legitimizing where they come from. Credentialing is an issue. We'll talk about this a little bit later, but a lot of operators don't have traditional experience, and it makes it hard to integrate them into the classroom. And obviously, we have limited time and limited resources. So I'm not going to beat these challenges to death on this call. What I'm going to do is I'm going to propose a few strategies that are working in my world that I believe to some degree or another would be useful. And so again, I'm hoping that one or two of these strategies resonates with someone and you're able to take it and run with it. I'm also always happy to discuss this outside the context of this call, as I'm extremely passionate about this. So let's just dive right in to strategy number one. And that is changing the timing of go-to-market. So there's a few things to consider here before I move forward, which is the way that startups go to market in the very beginning is very different. As anybody who's worked in the space knows, it's very different from how traditional companies or even well-funded startups go to market. Think of like the first $100,000 you need to make in revenue is a completely different skill set from taking the 100,000 to $1 million in revenue. And it's that 0 to 100K skill set that is very difficult to teach, because by nature, you are trying to take advantage of up and coming channels that are under leveraged and therefore less competitive. So it's an incredible challenge for educators to identify those tactics, get the knowledge they need, and implement them. And that's a huge reason why I left the startup world and joined education, because I wanted to bridge that gap. But one of the most important things we can do as we are teaching go-to-market is changing the order of operations. And this is something that we can implement in many settings, even if there's a pre-existing course that we're required to stick to. We can rearrange some components, perhaps. Even just a little bit of flexibility allows us to get the right mindset going, and that is a huge part of the battle. So a traditional order of operations for go-to-market is, let's find a problem, let's spend a lot of time building a business model, let's get advisors. That's a big thing here at Notre Dame, is a lot of student startups go and build an advisory board very early because they feel like that gives them credibility. They'll go even talk with investors, try and build the product, and only then will they begin selling. This is something that a mentor of mine in my early career named Sean Shepard would call, people want to build product and raise money instead of selling product and making money. This is a model that lends itself very well to a high-tech venture capital model, which I think a lot of students in the university world aspire to, and I don't think that is a bad thing. But it ignores what I believe is the more traditional and more straightforward go-to-market order of operations that actually is what's used on a day-to-day basis with the vast majority of businesses. So what I mean is, so many people have decided that the order in which you go to market should mirror that of a venture-backed company, which is meant to take big risks with a long payout horizon. And a lot of them are applying it to business models that could move much faster. Not to mention, I believe there's always ways to go to market faster, even in high tech. So a go-to-market forward order of operations is quite different. and this is what happens in the startup world early on, is let's find a problem and then let's immediately reach out to prospects, engage the market's interest. It is far fewer formal interviews and surveys and much more sales-oriented language. Let's actually try and sell this thing, perhaps even before we have the product fully finished. Obviously, there's like some lines there to make sure we do this ethically, but the goal here is how can we get real feedback from the market in a sales conversation? How can we do that within hours even of identifying a problem that we want to solve? And how can we iterate using the market's feedback, not on brainstorming sessions we have amongst ourselves as a founding team or as faculty? Once we've iterated a bit and we understand what the pitch should be, what pitch is going to actually generate revenue, then we build the product and then we actually generate the revenue, right? I'm more than happy to answer questions along this line, because I think this is a path that can be a little tricky to walk, but it changes the mentality of students where go-to-market is not this culminating event that we do at the end of all this preparation. It's the motor that constantly propels the business forward. We are always going to market. From the minute we have an idea, we're using go-to-market tactics to validate and pull us in the right direction. Another phrase that I use often is we all will start out 99% wrong, and our goal is to get 1% less wrong every day. And teaching students to go out to the real world and try and sell their solution is one of the easiest ways to quickly get 1% better every day. It's very hard to do that within a bubble. So again, just to recap, one of the easiest ways that we can get a go-to-market mindset and get more tactical in our conversations within a higher ed environment is let's go from GTM being this culminating event where we sell after everything else is done, and we start selling from day one. My guess is if you're working with students who have already generated revenue, this is often how they've done it. And I learned that while in emerging markets where there was not a lot of venture money to go pull from, and also working with blue collar businesses, watching how they actually started. They started by finding a problem and just trying to sell the solution immediately. So the order of operations is critical. There's two tools we can use here that I want to throw out. One is a very bad pun, so I apologize. I call it the maybe P. We've all heard of the MVP, minimum viable product, which I would define as the lowest scope version of a scalable solution. Meaning if you have an app you want to build, you build the most simple form of that app to test the market. I go to like another layer of extreme when it comes to the MVP, and I call it the maybe P. A maybe P is a business model that is simply meant to test the market's willingness to solve a problem, not to test a scalable solution. I often talk about a hot dog cart that popped up in South Bend. I moved to Indiana, which is a fairly quiet region of the US, from Latin America, where there is a ton of street food. And I am a large man who loves to eat street food. So I show up in Indiana and I'm in this fairly urban environment, but a quiet urban environment with no street food to speak of. And I was quite shocked. I was like, wow, it's a college town, a major universities nearby. I'm kind of surprised there's nothing here. Apparently there was another entrepreneur who realized that, and at the same time was thinking, why is there nothing open at 1 or 2 a.m. when students are out partying on a Friday night or during the week? And to help them have some kind of late night eats, there was very little available. And so instead of launching a whole restaurant, they opened up a hot dog cart. They went and spent maybe a few $100s on hot dogs and materials. I think they spent $2,000 on a cart. And they just started standing outside of the bars in the middle of the night, and they started selling hot dogs like crazy and validated the concept that students want something to eat, and street food is perhaps not a terrible way to do it. Now, I don't think they're going to launch a chain of hot dog carts, but they validated the market's willingness to pay to solve the problem. So a lot of times you have students with a very ambitious software idea that they want to build. And I think that is great. My goal here is not to deter students from taking large swings. That's what they should be doing when they're young. But there are much more manual business models they could test even for a few weeks to see if the market even wants to solve that problem. And that gives them so much more leverage when talking to investors or tapping into other ecosystem resources if they have those numbers. So we can experiment with channels, but a lot of growth hacking is actually rethinking your business model to test and enter the market. So the maybe P, you don't have to say the bad pun if you're not interested in that. I think conceptually, though, driving people towards more manual business models, even very temporarily to test the market, is a great way to inject go-to-market into the higher ed environment. A lot of times people ask me, how do you sell something that doesn't exist? And I come from a very outbound and sales prospecting heavy background. And the coming soon email is something that I use often, and we can share these slides out later so everybody has access to it. This is an example for a student project, which I don't know how much you know about Indiana. It is very cold here for half the year. We're fairly close to Canada, and we're right on Lake Michigan, which means that we get a lot of snow. And there are a lot of lakes in Indiana where people love to water ski, but as you can imagine, not exactly a great sport for the majority of the year. I have a student who's thinking about launching an indoor water skiing facility. That is not something that is easy to prove, and it's very difficult to come up with a maybe P. So how do you use go-to-market and sales language to test something that does not exist? And you can see here that, first off, there's a whole other conversation we can have around informality in go-to-market, which is critical. But you can see here how we are pitching something that will soon exist, but we are using a sales tactic and fairly sales aligned language to initiate that conversation. And there's a reason here. You see here the CTA, the call to action at the bottom of the email is, can I give you a quick call to get your thoughts? It's not, can I send you a survey? Can I interview you? You want this to feel as close as possible to a sales conversation, not because sales is often the best way to get somebody to respond, but we need to know if people will respond to sales language when we build this thing. And so we need to get our feedback requests to look as close as possible to a sales email, primarily just to make sure that people want to buy this. So happy to talk more about that in Q&A on other tactics. And I'll share these slides out, but this is a format we can use to kind of get the best of both worlds here, even if we're extremely early on a product that's hard to test. Okay, now let's go into the second strategy, which is, I think one that many universities do well, but I've seen it done exceptionally well here at Notre Dame, and that is make it easy for experts to help. The issue is that many people who understand the most relevant go-to-market tactics are very non-traditional, like myself. They don't have traditional credentials. They don't have a patience for bureaucracy. They're used to working in very nimble, fast-paced environments where they have a lot of autonomy. They don't particularly have documentation. They're not usually great organizers. They're usually looking forward, not backward. And they very rarely have deep experience with traditional education systems. They do have a lot of knowledge, a lot of pride in what they do, and a deep desire to help those who want to learn it, and often have quite a bit of flexibility in their role. They're busy, but they're flexible. The issue is, how do we tap into them as a resource for higher ed? And there's one person who I think is world-class at this, and his name is John Henry, and he runs a startup programs here at the Idea Center, which is the innovation heart of Notre Dame. And something that John Henry did really well is, when I got into the area and he found out I was here and he understood my experience, the first call that he made to me was not, hey, how can I get you to help here? It was, how do I make it as easy as possible for you to help students? And I thought that was a very genuine and thoughtful way to get me involved, because I value my time. I'm very willing to give it away for students, but oftentimes universities make it harder, not easier, to help. So there's a few things that I talked with John about that he executed brilliantly on. And I think that there are lessons that anybody in the higher ed space can take away when dealing with someone like me, who's a very scrappy startup person, didn't have a lot of patience for higher ed. The first thing he did was offer up students to help me to document my processes. Documentation was a struggle for me. And luckily at Notre Dame, I have a lot of extremely bright students who are very good at taking kind of abstract thoughts and documenting them very clearly. And so, as kind of a way to incentivize me to share my knowledge, he offered to have students help document it. And that was incredibly helpful. I think many people who are operating on the fringe when it comes to growth tactics would really benefit from that. Another thing is, Notre Dame has become sort of a networking hub for subject matter experts in the region. And, you know, that's always a struggle to do in a university environment. I think we have some big advantages where it's easy to bring people in, but sometimes it's hard to activate people. But that was a constant effort. And a lot of what John would say, again, as we went on, was, how can I get you to do more? It was, hey, how can I help you tap into the people in this system? That also leads to, you know, higher ed is a large beast of an institution, very difficult to navigate for someone who's used to teams of 5 to 10 people. So John has sort of been my Sherpa going through this entire system, helping me understand where I should get more involved, who I should meet, where I should spend my time, and really just opening doors. I think of a time where I was involved with a fellowship for a bunch of African entrepreneurs that we brought to the region, and it was awesome. But I was rubbing shoulders with, first off, very smart individuals who were the fellows there, but also the people who funded the program. And I'm not used to rubbing shoulders with, you know, that part of society. I mean, you know, these people who are funding multi-million-dollar deals for these fellowships. And John walked with me to so many people and introduced me and helped me get comfortable having those conversations so I could integrate into the experience. And I think that is something that at university employees can do an excellent job of, and it's very valuable. And I also think the more you can focus on what somebody's done rather than their credentials, especially in this space, the better. Because there's no degree for growth hacking. There's no degree for most of these tactics. And so understanding what people have done and doing your best to help the university understand when there's a gap in the credentials is critical. Okay, number 3 is we want to bring AI into the classroom as much as possible. And we're all thinking about how to leverage AI. And honestly, there are hours of conversations I could have about this. But there's 2 key things that AI does that I think is incredible for instructors who are trying to teach entrepreneurship in these kind of constrained environments. One of them is it helps you bring subject matter expertise into the classroom in the form of a bot. And I'm going to demonstrate a quick example of that with a bot that we've built. And then 2, it's going to democratize access to platforms and tools that would either be too expensive or too complicated for students to access early on. I'll discuss that in a second. But first, let's actually do a quick demo of what I mean. I'm going to stop presenting. Adam, could you confirm that you're seeing my GPT instead of my slides right now, or are you still seeing my slides? Sorry to
We're seeing your
interrupt.
GPT. No, we're all set. We're seeing your GPT.
Awesome. So one very simple example is there are some very counterintuitive tactics to writing outbound sales copy that is often not shared amongst students. And so one of the first things I wanted to do when I started thinking about building bots for the classroom for our entrepreneurship classes is how can I get students to be able to put together an email the way that I would have written it to be optimized for performance without having to get an instructor to be totally up to date on every single tactic. And so I worked with our developer, Dara, who is awesome and understood kind of what I was trying to do. And I built some prompts and he combined that with some code. And we ended up with a really interesting prompt. So we have a bot that we can give students who, let's say I have a parts running business and I need to write a soft CTA. This is a concept that we instruct on. There's a few different templates that I teach my students on, one of which is called a soft CTA. Pitching these services to machine shop owners in Indiana. So you'll see here how this email is absolutely nailing the structure of the kind of cold outbound I would write. This is not going to really work if you try and put it into GPT just straight up, because soft CTA is just a term that I use, and the structure is very particular. But you can see here how a student can just use natural language to describe what they need, and there's a bot that can write the email in a very specific way for them. This is very simple, and there's a lot of other copywriting bots out there. But what was very exciting to me is it allowed us to build something that then meant that a facilitator or an instructor in a classroom can say, let's use Pitch Builder to write one of the 4 different templates that you think will be useful. But the facilitator doesn't have to be an expert in copywriting. So using bots like this in the classroom, one, you may be able to incorporate these into existing classes and not even have to go through an accreditation cycle, depending on the rules of your organization. And it just takes so much pressure off of the facilitator to be the expert on everything. So obviously, this is a simple example, and we're extrapolating this across a number of areas in our curriculum that we write, from everything from entrepreneurial life design to even technical things. Something that's very exciting to me here is the ability to use GPT to talk with platforms. So when I say access to platforms and tools, one example here is that there's several tools that allow students to find contact data for prospects, but they're quite expensive and or require a lot of training to understand how to use. But we're building a bot right now, it'll be complete within the next week, that will allow a student to write a natural language response input, meaning I need to find the emails of machine shop owners in South Bend, Indiana. And there will be an API call that goes out and actually talks to the data platform that we have access to as an organization and provides a list for them within GPT. Which is mind-blowing to me because I initially set out thinking I would need to teach students about all these platforms without realizing that GPT can actually talk to them for them. So while we'll still definitely want to upskill students on some of these platforms as they go along, not even instructors would have to understand how to use a tool like Apollo.io. They just need to understand how to structure a prompt to get the data that they want. So all of a sudden, within moments, a student can write a great outbound email and can build a list of their target customer just by chatting with a bot. So the more that we can integrate these into the classroom, the better, because it's really going to democratize access to the information and the platforms that make go-to-market campaigns successful. There's also obviously ways to use AI as a sounding board and to instantly organize thoughts. I think the primary two benefits here are the platforms and the tactical expertise it gives us access to. Okay, number 4 is to do go-to-market, and probably not a grammatically correct sentence, but to do go-to-market outside of the classroom. Oftentimes, this is where we start. This is where we started with Notre Dame. There's kind of 2 programs I want to discuss that have been successful for us that are growing rapidly. One is the regional internship. This is the more advanced of the 2. So we've built a partnership. My organization, Rise, has built a partnership with Notre Dame, building off of the efforts I made as an innovation fellow before I joined Rise, in addition to grants that were written years ago by Rise and Notre Dame jointly, to basically figure out how to develop local talent in a way that will allow them to work with startups. Our region is growing really fast, and there's a lot of startups leading that growth, but there's not a deep enough talent pool to support them. And there's not enough ways to get younger students in the region who intend to stay to tap into those jobs and build more of a community-focused talent pool. So what we've decided to do is we are bringing students in with subject matter experts like myself, training them on these tactics, connecting them to local businesses as a free resource to execute campaigns and to build up their expertise. These students eventually grow into leadership roles where they're leading small teams of students on projects that we can then use to prep them for placement into venture-backed tech companies. So the Notre Dame side is building relationships with I won't say names right now, but like very, very prominent startup accelerators that are based all around the world that can serve as sort of a placement funnel for the students in our local area. So we're not only giving students the opportunity to get hands-on experience, we're giving them the opportunity to grow into startup roles that they can work in remotely and prep them to be absolutely killer employees for local startups with a breadth of experience. So even though this is not a classroom-based function, it drives the culture of go-to-market in the area. And honestly, if we can get it tied to placement in strong companies, it's going to help admin buy in so much more quickly than just simply spinning out new startups, right? It's that language is much more aligned with a traditional administrative view. So this regional internship that we're running is picking up a lot of steam, and we're very excited about the potential here. I think that one of the easiest ways to get started with something like this is to launch a student-run agency. I did this while I was in college. I helped launch a student-run social media agency that was, I had the head of my department as my mentor to build it. And we replicated this within Notre Dame as well. It's a much more bare bones approach where we're not really going out into the community at first. What we do is we kind of build a small group of kind of diehard students who really are scrappy and want to learn these tactics. And we bring them into whatever the entrepreneurship hub is. That can be anything from the Idea Center here at Notre Dame to a single classroom with a faculty member who is passionate about it. You do not have to have a major organization or building to do this, right? You can simply have a small band of pirates eager to jump into some kind of abstract project and just figure it out as you go. The key is you need someone who can communicate to administration about it and a subject matter expert who can train the students up. So John Henry and I were the ones who partnered to start building this up in Notre Dame, where we found a handful of students who were willing to learn how to do outbound at scale as a growth channel. And we attached ourselves to student founders and university initiatives that needed help and used those as our guinea pigs. And eventually we developed an in-house team with a couple different trainers who can train more people without me being directly involved to actually build some deep subject matter expertise. But it all started with just 4 people, a couple students and John Henry and myself who were interested in supporting local founders. And it's grown into this regional initiative with multiple organizations involved. Obviously, we're building off of a lot of groundwork that's been laid with grants and such, but we had to prove the concept somehow, and it really just happened over a few Zoom calls running some campaigns. The key here is to focus tactically on 1 or 2 areas where you have a subject matter expert who can contribute. So for me, that was, at the time, outbound was very relevant. How can we prospect at scale and use that for early traction? You may have somebody who's excellent at social media or content marketing in your area, a number of different things. We're even doing some things with AI as an internship here. The key here is you get a few upperclassmen who can pick things up really fast and who are extremely passionate about it, who can then train younger cohorts that will be around much longer. So a lot of our new entries into the program are freshmen at Notre Dame. And we're excited about that because it allows us to have better retention year over year and better knowledge transfer. And it's also easy if you have a tech transfer department or some sort of student startup organization to attach yourself to that. But we call it the boiler room. But any way that you can build a room full of students who understand a few tactics and you can deploy them, it's a great way to start here. We're running a little bit short on time, so I'm going to run through these a little quickly. We're experimenting a lot with labs as a course structure, where it allows us to be more modular and allows us to speak administration's language a little bit better. So in our revenue lab course that we're deploying right now in sort of a beta phase, the course structure is this repetitive cycle every time. A student will share their business. Students break out into groups to solve 2 or 3 problems for that business. Each of them are assigned a certain category, like, positioning and pricing, or another student group may be actually focusing on the pitch. Each of them will have a series of facilitator and AI-driven resources to get the answers they need. They'll all come together at the end after using bots to help form ideas and build an action plan. And then at the end, students will have a reflection period where they figure out how to apply this to their own business. So this model is a little bit easier to get admin buy-in because you call it a lab, you show a general structure, but then you can keep it modular in the sense of you can replace the bots to make sure that they're helping students execute the most relevant tactics. AI can fill in a lot of that, the knowledge gap there. And students get a lot of reps, which is really important with go-to-market, is that you don't just get stuck in a bubble. You see a lot of different approaches. I think what makes me good at go-to-market is the fact that I've worked with hundreds of startups and run thousands of experiments. So I have a lot of shots on target. And that's a really beneficial structure for students as well. But I think the key here is the more flexible the structure of the class, we can use technology to fill in the specifics and keep things relevant in a way that doesn't require us to go through the full accreditation cycle every single time we change. Lastly, I'll say it's important to get some quick wins, especially if you're dealing with administration or faculty who are not familiar with the startup landscape. And so there's going to be some convincing to do. I don't know if that's an issue in your organization, but I've definitely been in scenarios where that's been an issue. The key here is getting really good at choosing which startups are most likely to succeed and using these tactics there. not just for administration, but also to get student buy-in. That's one of the most difficult things. If you get a student who's planning on going into consulting career and then you try and convince them to learn go-to-market tactics for scrappy startup life, it can be kind of a hard pitch. So focusing on areas where they're going to get wins to help them recognize that the tactics work is critical. Focusing on channels like direct outbound is great because right now it's fairly relevant and it's a very low cost, easy way to get in touch with people. But that channel will change just by the nature of how go-to-market works. Also important to identify who like the diehards are in your innovation or entrepreneurship group, what students are incredibly passionate and are ambitious and want to build something, and bringing them in early into the program and into these efforts to get them to support it. And then what I've noticed is the more we prioritize social impact efforts inside of Notre Dame, the easier it is to get faculty buy-in. And also it's easier to pitch. It's easier to get success in those areas. And obviously a lot of us are very interested, myself included, in the social impact space. I've noticed that the more the early projects in an initiative like this are focused on social impact, the easier it is to get people rallied around. So the key is you don't want to pick projects that are going to take years to pay off or even months. You want something where you can demonstrate, that there's traction quite quickly to get people to want to invest more. The reason that we're able to do a lot of what we do now is because over the past years, once the groundwork was laid, we were able to very quickly prove that these tactics worked and get faculty to support the initiative. So to recap, as we're right at Q&A time, the key here is we need to rethink how we teach the timing of go-to-market and shift to a go-to-market always, not go-to-market as a culminating event. We need to make it as easy as possible for subject matter experts to engage with us and help students. We got to bring AI into the classroom however we can to make sure that we are not always responsible for being on the cutting edge, but we're focused on being great facilitators and great instructors. We need to do go-to-market outside of the classroom often before we can bring it into the classroom more effectively. And using flexible structure in our courses like labs can help us do that, to help us gradually bring what's going on outside into the classroom. And then obviously focusing on getting quick wins to start so we can do the long-term game more effectively. Thank you so much. I hope something has been helpful to you here. I am more than happy to answer questions on any of this here. And then also I'm sure we can share my contact info, and I'm more than happy to be available over time to describe this more in depth. So
Thank you so much, Logan. And also for your generous offer to remain available to us. We really, really appreciate that. I think we got a lot of benefit from your learnings today, and you ended on a really high note for us because it fits. We have basically our slogan as a university is for good, and a lot of our researchers and innovators are working on impact problems. So our center, the WIC Innovation Center, which also has our innovation support team, I see Daneo is on our call today as well. Our innovation support team is really effectively our TTO, but we obviously look beyond the scope of just technology at our university. We look for innovation across all of our faculties. So we do fulfill that function since you brought it up. But yes, we are for good. We are looking at opportunities on how to use our innovation to translate out into society to solve real problems. And it's something that our society really sorely needs. So that's our core mandate. And so I really appreciated the idea that you can actually find quick wins by choosing that domain. So I guess I'll start off by asking you one of Kaya's questions. So Kaya's actually joined us. He's one of the former speakers from the series. And he said, how do you get to know which startups or ventures are going to deliver value quickly? How do you get a sense of that? What metrics do you use? Sort of how do you filter?
Yeah, it's a great question because I think that it's going to depend a little bit on the focus. If you're starting with more of your tech transfer hub, it's going to depend a little bit on the focus of that group, right? So at Notre Dame, we call it the commercialization team, and the de-risking teams are primarily driving our tech transfer. And you're trying to find, it's a balance. I talk quick wins, but really in a short term, because you're trying to find a group where you're like, oh, I know that people want that. There's high demand. That might not be the highest ceiling business, right? We have technology coming out of Notre Dame that will probably take years to develop and commercialize, that will probably exit for far more. than the startups that I'm focusing on. But I focus on the startups where I believe that it will be easy to communicate a no-brainer value proposition over something very manual like outreach, because you don't, an email is free to send in theory, right? There's obviously some infrastructure as you scale. So right now it's kind of a combination of where are the no-brainer value propositions that will show fast growth, and which of those startups lend themselves well to the cheap growth channels at our disposal, right? Whereas there may be incredible technology that will change the world that needs 5 more years. And I'm going to focus on the quick wins. So by the time that startup that needs 5 years is ready, I already have admin buy-in to come in and help, right? So I don't know if it's so much, this is where subject matter experts can help, because it's very hard to have hard KPIs on that until you started doing it and you've run many experiments, and then you kind of know who's going to do what and how certain startups are going to perform. It's more of you get somebody in there who understands a certain channel and can say, these will work over cold email, or these will work really well over social. And it becomes a little bit more subjective, which is a dangerous world, right? But that's how we approach it now. The benefit is the more reps we have, the more we have a database. For example, I know that interior designers are very responsive over email. So if I see a startup that has a social impact component and is involved anyway with interior design, I'll be like, that one, because I know we'll get people to talk to us, right? So there's a little bit there you have to consider.
Wow, so that go-to-market mindset has really infiltrated everything that you guys are doing. And in particular, what's interesting is you've adopted the use of technology very quickly. So I want to ask you, we get a lot of emails at the moment. So the first question is, how do we manage this attention deficit issue where people are getting an influx of emails? How are you gaining their attention? I saw you did craft that a little bit into the wording of your email, where you started off with a hook. But what are your little tricks to do that, to get people's attention in this space as you're growth hacking?
Yeah, so I'll talk about copy second. The first one is you have to think about your least competitive persona. I always talk about how I was with a startup that was that was trying to be the Whole Foods of the internet, and 2 weeks into our launch, Amazon bought Whole Foods and became the Whole Foods of the internet. And all of a sudden our ads were 100 times more expensive. It didn't matter how ideal the persona was, it mattered that we couldn't reach them. So I often encourage students to think about who is the least competitive group to go after. There's nothing particularly moral about going after a harder group to reach simply for the sake of it. It's who is the easiest person who can still be the right prospect for us. So it starts with the targeting and thinking of who has the least crazy inbox right now, right? Now, second off, that might not always be an option if you're selling something like software to other software companies. Everybody's inbox is terrible. The key is brevity and informality, which is something we could probably have a whole other conversation on. Very difficult to do when you're dealing with, a senior who's gone through multiple English classes and has, excellent grammar and things like that. You'll notice, quick one for you, I led the email with that, not exactly going to pass in a term paper, right? So you have to kind of break down the formality that often comes from the way we teach marketing and copywriting. There's a whole, again, hours I could spend on that subject, but I think that's the first thing I do is just like, you need to talk almost like you text over email, because you have to sound like a human. So, but yeah, so many other things to consider there.
So that's fascinating. And I suppose we've got to figure out how to leverage AI effectively without adding to the influx that people are dealing with. But since you're going out with this growth markets or this growth strategy to market very early, Kaya asks, if you're going to be prospecting and selling early to get that critical feedback, so you get people talking, how do you manage that interim period before you've got a market ready or viable product? How do you keep their interest going? And do you have to actually do that, or is the fact that they're speaking to you sufficient that they ultimately do convert, or is it that your market's big enough that it actually doesn't matter in the end?
Yeah, so I have a very extreme view on this, so feel free to ratchet this back a little bit in your own world. There's a few rules I live by when I'm doing this, because I recognize that I am kind of walking an ethical high wire at times here, and I want to always be on the right side of this. One is I never take personal info or payment information ever until I have something that can be used that moment, right? So I don't actually sell actually vend anything until it's ready. And I also don't sell anything that I don't feel extremely confident I can actually put together. So I'm not selling very fringe, ambitious features. I'm focusing on what is the thing that we know we already can build. For example, I mentioned a bot that can talk to my database tool, right? We haven't built it yet, but we've already proven that we can. It's simply putting it all together, right? So making sure that I'm not selling anything that has any chance of not existing is critical. The other thing is I run those tests in very small intervals. I will maybe send 100 emails to start to a rather large group. If I get positive replies, great. I'm going to turn off that email. I am going to thank them for the responses. I'm going to get back to you as soon as possible with some more information, and we'll have a conversation. Or maybe I'll just call them and chat and go from there. But I'm not doing it at incredibly high volume until I have something. The key, though, is I want some sort of indicator to make a bet on, right? I often don't have enough data at the bottom of the funnel to have a perfect view, but I can see, because as a subject matter expert, I have the ability to know how many multiples of the average performance are we doing. If we're 2x the regular reply rate, I know we're in a great spot. If we're 10% of the regular reply rate, that's a little bit more difficult. So it's doing small batches and then just making sure you're very careful about what you actually promise in those early stages.
Awesome. That's great. So one of our faculty, Professor Raghu, has asked, what is the course called and how many credits is the course? So perhaps if you can give us a relative value in terms of the credits so that we have a sense relative to your other programs in the university, if you have that data on hand.
Yeah, great question. It varies a lot depending on the institution. So for example, we've been doing work kind of statewide with our main community college system here. I don't know if we're using the same terminology in Johannesburg, so you'll have to translate that for me if needed, but I think we all get the gist. Where it's actually like, it's a lot of credits. We have like some 6 credit courses, some very extensive programs. We have a lot of control over that program as a vendor because community colleges can act with much more flexibility in the region, right? With Notre Dame, these are 1.5 credit courses. They're taught at the Idea Center because that allows us to act under a different administrative standard, and we have more flexibility in how quickly we can turn over new material in the course. So it's very dependent on the institutional requirements. I tend to prefer the fewer credit, much more tactical and tactile courses than the longer ones, because it just allows for more modularity. But really for us, it's how do we structure this so it fits into the institution's existing requirements? But we do notice in a 4-year institution, fewer credits is often the place to play if we want flexibility. So.
Brilliant. And one of the things that I think we've learned a lot from you today is that students play a critical role in the ecosystem. And this was a really student-centric view that you've taken. It's not only empowering your students and you're funding employment opportunities for them at an early stage in their career. I think we don't yet utilize our students' skills enough in this space. Students are incredibly energetic. At WITS, we now have a couple of internship programs going. So we have a GRIP program that's actually being run by another person who's joined our call today, Raj. And that program is an internship program helping to, bridge the skills gap that exists coming out of uni, going into industry. But we also have some interns who have been assisting us in the innovation support team, the tech transfer office, if I could just use that terminology briefly. And we're finding these students to be incredibly insightful and energetic. So I love seeing how you've leveraged students and their abilities in your work. What do you find happens? Do the students end up staying on and progressing their career in the university, or do they kind of find external work? Do they join your startups that come out of uni? What happens in the end?
Yeah, so something that Notre Dame's done an excellent job of, better than any other institution I've been in so far, is they have hired people in their innovation hub who have the credentials needed to get stuff done, but also understand what an entrepreneur is. They understand that there's a scrappiness and grit that is far more important than perhaps academic success. And it means that a lot of the students who are involved, their STEAM program, their entrepreneurship innovation program, the one that's very similar to probably the one that you're going to launch, attracts those students and is honed in on it. In fact, it's I don't know the percentage, but every student I met from that program is an immigrant, and many of them are first-generation college students. You have a scrappiness and drive that is just like very hard to teach, right? Especially at an institution where there's, I mean, we're known for having a lot of legacy students, right? And so it's, I think that has been critical to our success. And what happens is you get one or two of those students who they're scrappy enough to be open, and then they implement and they get a ton of success, and people are like, you get to do what? Like, I'm doing an internship with Deloitte, which is like fine, but I'm pushing paper. You're like launching a super cool social impact startup and getting paid well. What's happened right now is we're still early, but because our entrepreneurship innovation program is a graduate program, we actually are like, we have a lot of retention because students tend to go into that program after getting introduced to what we're doing. I'm not saying we're the cause of that, but we're very fortunate that we're getting freshmen involved who then, over the course, many of them will probably stay on not just for 4 years, but maybe even further. I would say, though, that even with a turnaround of 2 years, you can still build a really interesting culture. What it all starts with is you got to get a couple students who are open enough to get the cool gigs. And then it's like, you get to do what? Like, my internship's so much more boring. How do I get into that? Right. So the students do a lot of recruiting for us. And I think what happens is you have a lot of people show up and they're like kind of skeptical when they're looking at, very non-traditional tactics, and then they see it work in the moment and they're like hooked. So.
Superb. It was wonderful to hear this. You seem to have, quite a hustle culture going in your center, in your activities, which is awesome. I guess one or two more questions if we have time. One of the questions is, between business models, do you generally change your strategy and your approach? You did speak about multiple communication channels. You spoke in particular about selecting email as the right medium. What other things or elements of your strategy might you change depending on the sector or the target audience?
Yeah, I think the more consumer you are, the more you have to be social and content driven. Although that's getting much harder. Like, those things get harder every year. Um, I am I I'm very focused on AI as an automation and optimization tool from an ops perspective, because really it's really hard to hack the bottom line on things like ads, but maybe you can get a bit more margin for an early stage startup if you're really efficient at operating. So honestly, we're very email and outbound forward right now. I think what we do is we change the goal. If I'm working with a very high tech, we have some technology coming out that's like, you can sell it to the DoD, Department of Defense, and maybe a few others, but like, this is like, there's probably 5 buyers in the world for this product. We're not using email to go out and blast the world with the message. What we're doing is we're having a very sophisticated data acquisition process to map who's in our alumni that can connect us to the 5 buyers in the world for this product. So you're talking to somebody who's very outbound focused. And so when you're a hammer, everything looks like a nail. So I'm not here telling you that it's only email. You'll have a subject matter expert in your region who may have the same secret sauce in social, and you should listen to them. But you can still leverage the same channels if you change the goals and maybe the focus, where it's not volume focus, it's data focus. How do we get the best list possible for this? But I also think it's important, especially early, to recognize who you can help. And I have specifically not gone after most of our high tech because it's a very different world, and Notre Dame has a very strong alumni network. So it's like, I don't know how much value there is here. It's the middle where you need these channels, but no one's teaching them, to go after maybe like high-end consumer or your typical B2B offer. But a lot of my job going forward will be to find the next channel. That's what a growth hacker does. You're never really too attached to a single channel. I think that answer will change if we talk next year. So.
Very cool. And I think one of the things you also pointed out there is we at WITS also have an extremely successful and competent global group of alumni, people who have gone and become change makers at various institutions or entrepreneurs around the world. And that's something we haven't yet properly activated. It's about giving our university startups access into that network. And it's so interesting to observe that they have still a deep reverence for our university. They appreciate this was a huge and critical stepping stone in their own success and career, and that it really was a big enabler of how they got where they are, and they want to give back. So that's a great little tip there, that we can activate our alumni network to get into, that potentially scarce buyer, or get the ear of someone who is potentially scarce if we're selling to a limited audience. And then more generally, how we might use alumni. But unfortunately, we've run out of time. I'm so excited that we did this session. It was awesome, Logan. Wonderful to see you. Thank you so much for making the time for us today. We truly do value your time and appreciate it very much.
No, this was a blast. Loved it. Thank you so much for having me.
Thanks, Logan. Hopefully we'll stay in touch and take care of your side.
Take care.
Thanks all for joining us. Have a wonderful day further. Bye-bye, everyone.